Epilepsy is not a curse, nor is it anything to fear. For help, contact Epilepsy South Africa.
Approximately 50 million people currently live with epilepsy worldwide, making it one of the most common neurological diseases globally. And globally, an estimated 2.4 million people are diagnosed with epilepsy each year. Now, epilepsy affects 1 in every 100 South Africans, but fear, discrimination, stigma, and misconception still surrounds this condition. National Epilepsy Week runs from the 15th to the 21st of June. So how much and how should you know about this condition called epilepsy? Is it curable? Can people living with epilepsy play sport, drive cars, get employed? And how would you know if someone is having epileptic seizures? And if it does happen in front of you, what would you do? Well, stay tuned, because today we unpack all you need to know about epilepsy. And to help us do this, we have an expert panel comprised of a professor in neurology from Wits University, a social worker from Epilepsy South Africa, co-founders of the Epilepsy Awareness South Africa, someone living with epilepsy, and a child ambassador from that organization, Epilepsy Awareness South Africa, and a mother of a child, of course, living with epilepsy, to share her personal journey with this condition. Now, we invite you to be part of this show by asking us a few questions or simply just sharing your views with us. And the number to call in that instance is Johannesburg 714-6918 or 6919. You can also tweet us at SABC Health Talk, or simply just interact with us on our Facebook page, SABC Health Talk. Sit back, relax, and learn from this exciting show. Just coming to you after a short break. I'm Dr. Sello Mataung, and this is Health Talk.
Well, a very good morning and welcome to AM News Live at 1000 hours across all Central Africa regions.
A fitting send-off for a revolutionary giant, a life dedicated in service of the people.
The result means that the Swallows are out of the ABC Municipal League and drop to the amateur fourth tier of South African football, the SAB League.
Tune in on AM News every Saturday and Sunday from 10 hours.
My name is Tembega, but I'm known with Tito. My name is Tuli. I'm 22 years old. And I was diagnosed with epilepsy in 2014, September. And for me to find out that I got epilepsy, I went to Runbury Clinic. I used to go every month for my asthmatic inhalers. So I went there. I just explained to them that I'm fitting at home. So they asked like what kind of fitting I'm having, I'm shaking or whatnot. I have to ask someone to like observe me when I'm having that thing and take notes. And then, okay, I went back home. It happened, other day it happened at the clinic. So that they decided to call the ambulance. I was admitted to Helen Joseph. When I get there, they run all the tests and the EEG, and then the doctor told me that I have to start taking Epilim to control my seizures. I asked what is causing that. He said he don't know, but we have to do more tests. And then I went back home. The following month, I went for the CT scan and also EEG. And then the doctor said, you have to keep taking this medication. It was Epilim CR400. It was a high doses for me because if I took it, like I will feel dizzy, tired, like I won't able like to walk on my own. Like I will start like shaking and collapsing. I went back to hospital. I was also admitted for 3 days. Then like they reduced the dosage. I took CR 200 grams and 50 grams of Epitech. I keep going to hospital because like I was just stressing. I couldn't accept it. What is causing it? Why now? Because at home, I don't know like if there was someone who had epilepsy or what. So the doctor said the cause is unknown, but the trigger, I have to like write down what happened before I have the seizure. So they gave me an epilepsy diary to record all my seizures and what time, how long they took and what happened after. So I kept that diary with me. Every time when I'm going to see the neurologist, I used to take it with me. So get to the point is like what was triggering it was stress and pressure and tired. So all the time when I'm tired or stressed, I used to have seizure. And I started like monitoring that. So since last year September, I didn't have any of the seizures. That is what is the best. And other thing, it was so hard for me because where I'm staying, people that they couldn't understand what's going on with me. Some people are like, this one is demonic possessed or whatnot. So like it was so hard for me, even like to like share with other people that I'm epileptic, and it was very hard.
All right, so we're going to learn all about epilepsy and what this lady was talking about in a moment. But first up, let me take this opportunity to introduce our special guests. First up is Professor Girish Modi. Professor Modi is a specialist neurologist and head of neurology at Wits University. Prof, welcome to our talk.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Right. And closest to me here is Linda Diaz-Menezes, who's a co-founder of Epilepsy Awareness South Africa, accompanied by a young man sitting close to her, Maximilian van Heerden.
Yes, that's right.
Also a co-founder, I'm told, but child ambassador of the same organization. Welcome to Health Talk, you two.
Thank you so much for having us.
All right. I'm going to come back to you and ask you about, what your organization does. But first, Prof, let's start by unpacking what this condition is. What are we talking about? What is epilepsy?
Epilepsy is a very interesting condition because it's probably the only condition we know where, in terms of a disorder of the brain, there's an overdrive. So it's almost as if there's every neuron in the brain fires simultaneously and creates an energy through an electrical, we call it a storm, that spreads over the entire brain. And when that happens, the brain ceases to function. And so we could call epilepsy an electrical storm that invades the brain at various intervals. The problem with it is, before we make the diagnosis of epilepsy, the first thing we need to identify is what we call a seizure, or in terms of common knowledge, a fit.
Okay. We're going to come back to describing what it looks like, typical signs and symptoms, and in fact, perhaps even go back to the causes. But how common is this condition?
So it's reasonably common. It's like your insert said, it's one of the commonest neurological conditions globally. So if you look at the whole world, 2 to 5% will have epilepsy, varying depending on the statistics in the country. In South Africa, we think it's about 5% of the population that has epilepsy. And there are various reasons, and in different regions of the world, there are various causes. So we have the developing nations where the infections are quite important. We may discuss it, like the tapeworm or cysticercosis infection, very common in, say, in the Eastern Province in South Africa, South America. And then you get the developed nations where there are slightly different causes, where it's non-infectious mostly. But the majority of epilepsies fall into what doctors do, the term we use when we don't know. We call it idiopathic. Right, so it's a very good name. It sounds important.
Yeah.
And so idiopathic epilepsy is the commonest. It basically means that the majority of cases we don't identify a cause. That doesn't mean there's something not wrong in the brain.
Right.
We just don't have the imaging capabilities right now to see disruptions of, say, nerve cells at the moment. So we know that the basic mechanism lies in the neuron in the brain, and specifically in the temporal regions of the brain. And we know that there's something wrong in the mechanism, the way it's supposed to fire or the way it's supposed to modulate its function with all other neurons in the brain. And so that's where the focus happens.
Okay. We're going to come back to, obviously, signs and symptoms and different types, if there are any. But let's understand, about the level of awareness of this condition in the country. You have co-founded an organization called Epilepsy Awareness South Africa.
That's correct, yes.
Tell us about the organization.
The organization's quite young, and Max and I, for the past 2 years, we've done a lot. We've had our walks and we've done our awareness campaigns. Max has also been involved in our school talks, and we're planning to go into corporate talks now, just so people with epilepsy know, as employees, what their rights are, what grounds they can stand on. But our foundation mostly is about freeing the stigma from epilepsy and making sure that everyone knows the basic first aid. A lot of people don't know what to do if their friend or colleague has a seizure, how to perform basic first aid for seizures. So that's what our foundation is.
And what motivated you to co-found this?
Well, what motivated it is Max and I met through a mutual friend, and his mother's got epilepsy, and I've been living with epilepsy since I was 12. So together we've been on our own. Personally, we've just been raising awareness and letting everyone know around us what epilepsy is. So we decided, let's do something together, and we've grown quite a lot.
Let's hear from the young man. Max, you're still at school, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
All right. Just tell us about what motivated you to start getting involved in this organization.
Well, my mom has epilepsy, and as a Cub Scout when I was younger, it was my duty to do something as charity. And I saw people with epilepsy and at a care center, and no one really knew about epilepsy and what it is. So I decided to help them and help people understand what epilepsy is.
So what about your schoolmates? I believe you've given talks at schools. You're a child ambassador. Tell us about your experience, talking to your mates at school. Do they know much about epilepsy?
In my school, there's people in my school that have epilepsy seizures. And it's difficult for people in school because they don't understand what to do and how to help the person with epilepsy.
Okay, and I'm sure you're educating even the teachers, some of the teachers, isn't that so?
That's true.
All right. Prof, let's get back to you. We told that there's different types. Just take us through,
Okay, so there are lots of classifications, and the classifications are very complicated. But from a practical point of view, so when you're faced with a patient, you need to know two things. Is the seizure or the fit generalized, or is it partial? So how we differentiate that in the generalized seizures, so the first thing that happens is you lose consciousness. So you start with a bang, you fall. So you're walking or you're standing and boom, you're gone. There's no warning, there's no aura, as we call it. There's nothing to suggest that this is going to happen. So that forms the group of the generalized seizures. The partial seizures are characterized by mild impairment in awareness. So there's loss of awareness but not loss of consciousness. And that's the ones where you get the simple partial, where there's absolutely no loss of consciousness. And those are the ones where you sometimes see a guy's thumb twitching or the cheek twitching. So it's a very focal discharge from the brain. One little center in the brain causing that part of the body that the brain controls to move or to get a sensation. So the symptoms can be motor, like in a movement, sensory, like in a sensation, or autonomic, like in sweating. So we've even had patients who come and their seizure is a sweat on one side of the face. Okay, then you get the generalized forms. So let's get back to that because that's the more common one. So in those, so you start with a loss of consciousness, and then you can have a very different type of manifestation, the symptoms that you talk of. And so you can get patients who just limp, and we call that atonic. You get patients who get stiff, only stiff, and we call that tonic. Then you get the ones who get stiff and they jerk, and so we call those tonic, clonic.
Yeah.
Or you get the ones that only jerk, we call that clonic. There's also a form where you get this rapid jumping of the body, we call that myoclonic. And then the one that everyone wants to talk about is the absence or petit mal. And that happens frequently in children. We see that quite often missed, right? Where they blank out for 3 seconds. So I could be talking to you and say, my name is, I blank out, and then say Girish Modi. So that's the kind of epilepsies. So those are the generalized forms. In the partial forms, like I said, we get the simple partial with no loss of consciousness. You then get the complex partial with loss of awareness. Now that's the one that we sometimes talk of as temporal lobe epilepsy. The one with the aura, where patients come and they get a feeling in the stomach, or they get a smell, or they get a taste, or they hear music. I've had a patient recently who said she would hear symphonies, and so now she's taking her Epilim and it's gone. And I said, so do you feel good or bad? She's missing out, you see. And she says, no, but I couldn't hear people, so you just... So you get all those auras, and then the auras lead to sort of shuffling movements. You see them sitting and then they start shuffling and do strange things, walk around, you know, lip smacking, lip chewing, and then they fall. And then they have the seizure, which could be any of those that I described. Tonic, clonic, tonic, clonic, myoclonic, atonic, or absence.
All right.
So that's a nice, simple way of looking at it. But the key to know this is that there's a generalized form that starts with loss of consciousness and the partial one that doesn't.
All right. Okay. We are about to run out of time in this segment, but just in the last few seconds, what are you planning, your activities that you're planning for the next few months?
The next few months, November is Epilepsy Awareness Month, so we're looking forward to that, and we're planning awareness campaigns for that. And then every year we do Purple Day, which is on the 26th of March of every year. I think the 26th of March next year is a Monday, so we'll be planning our walk on the Sunday, and everyone's welcome to join us on the Sunday. We're going to have a walk to raise epilepsy awareness.
Okay. Well, I can only wish you well in your endeavors, and then, yeah, keep up the good work. That was Linda Diaz-Menezes, accompanied by Max van Heeren from Epilepsy Awareness South Africa. Time for a quick commercial break. When we come back, we'll continue our discussion on epilepsy. Please stay with us.
Need a natural multivitamin and mineral immune booster that lifts your energy and balances your pH levels? Sure you do. Lerumo, with 15 times the potassium in bananas, 17 times the calcium in milk, 10 times the vitamin A in carrots, 25 times the iron in spinach, 9 times the protein in yogurt, and 97 times the vitamin B in kale. Lerumo, the superhero. On the inside. Available at Dis-Chem, leading pharmacies and health stores countrywide. Lerumo, feel the difference.
Water-wise, water is an essential need. The scarcity of it could lead to loss of many lives, including livestock, plants, and much more. It requires us to use it sparingly and responsibly in times of need, failing which our taps and sanitation will not function. For more on water and weather issues, stay tuned to News Today, every Friday at 4:45 Central African Time. SABC News, making you water-wise.
Welcome back. We're talking epilepsy, and with me in our studio is Prof. Girish Modi, who's a specialist neurologist and head of neurology at Wits University. And we're now joined by another special guest, Angeline Tsepetse, who is living with epilepsy. Welcome to Health Talk once again, Angeline.
Thank you very much.
All right. We're going to come back to you, but let's start by talking about epilepsy and employment. Are there, do people with epilepsy have rights to do normal work to the extent that they can? And, are there some occupations that are not suited to people with epilepsy?
Yeah.
Can you unpack that?
I think that's a very, very important question that you're bringing up. There's this, you earlier mentioned the stigma and the epilepsy awareness group and the Epilepsy South Africa that keeps fighting it.
Yeah.
So we still have that issue, and people find out you've got epilepsy, they're too afraid to employ you. But there should be no reason not to employ. There should be no reason at all for you not to employ someone on the basis of that person having epilepsy. It's not acceptable. By labor law, it's not acceptable. It's not even legal.
So it's not. So we don't even have occupations where you can't.
But there's a common sense thing here.
All right.
So a common sense thing tells you that people with this should not be working in conditions that could be dangerous to themselves or to others. So working with, say, big machinery is a huge issue.
Yeah.
Right? And so if a guy, and the problem with epilepsy, like I said, is it's so unpredictable. And you can be completely well controlled in medicines. And one day you get up, you got a little sniffle or whatever the trigger, and you can have it.
Right.
So you have to factor that into account. And so putting a person with epilepsy and making him go and work with machinery that's dangerous, sewing machines, or even working under cars or something. Now you have to have common sense. So you've got to employ the people, and then you've got to adjust their employment.
Yeah.
Where the problem arises is when someone's already employed and then develops it. Then there's a big, what we call gemors, because all employers go crazy. Do you understand?
I thought we had a caller on the line. Ephraim, is the caller still on the line?
Yes, sir.
Ephraim, my apologies, man. Welcome to Health Talk.
Okay, sir. I would like to ask a question about this epilepsy.
Yes?
Yeah, I have this epilepsy, but my problem is that it only happens while I am sleeping. It hasn't happened while I'm awake or something.
All right.
And, yeah, I want to know what is it. Because even I went to the hospital 2 times. They checked and they didn't have a clear picture. What is it? What kind of epilepsy is it?
All right. Okay. Excellent question, Prof.
Yeah. So that's a common form of epilepsy, which we call nocturnal epilepsy. It's a relatively benign form of epilepsy. The only problem is that it can, from being just purely nocturnal, move into any time. So there's a strange reason behind it. It relates to your rhythms, because epilepsy also has a center in the brain that can shoot, and it's somehow linked to your day-night center, which sits in your brain stem. And so these are patients who just have it at night.
So what should you do?
But you're still having a fit at night.
Yeah.
So, and you list maybe next to a spouse or a partner.
Yeah.
And the accompaniments with epilepsy are you could bite your tongue, you could swallow your tongue, you could wet yourself. You still have to treat it.
Okay.
Okay. It doesn't mean you're safe during the day, because at night lots of things can happen.
Great. We'll get back to that. And then now, Angeline.
Yes, sir.
You've been with us before.
Yes, I
Just
have.
remind us of your story again. I mean, we're talking about epilepsy and the workplace. You have epilepsy. You've been living with epilepsy for a while now.
Yes, for 12
and you're
years
employed
now.
to doing a normal job. Just tell us about yourself.
Okay, I was diagnosed with epilepsy in 1998, and I have been on medication for the past 12 years.
Right.
Although it wasn't working for me, still on medication, up until in 2010, I went to a neurologist who then put me on the right medication. So thank God, up until today, this would be my 7th year without any seizures whatsoever. And yeah.
And you are able to do your work normally?
Normally.
And there's no discrimination?
There's no discrimination.
Does your employer know that you have epilepsy?
Yes, they do.
Oh, interesting one. Let's take Musa on the line from Durban. Musa, welcome. Musa, are you there? Okay, Musa is gone. Okay, let's get back. Now, look at some of those, occupations that normally feature when people talk about epilepsy. Pilots, drivers.
Okay, so the pilot thing is a big one.
Yeah.
The CAA will say no.
Right.
Right, and it becomes an issue because pilots also fly at different, especially international flights. There's this whole sleep issue, and we'll discuss that maybe, but of the triggers, bad sleep or sleep deprivation is a huge trigger. So we have to apply common sense there. Right, and I know at one stage when I was on the CAA, we would get people coming and I said, I've had no fits for 2 years, I'm clear. And it's a very tricky one, very, very tricky.
So what is the position? No.
So the position has been that if you have a completely normal MRI, if you have a completely normal EEG, including sleep-deprived or a Holter EEG, and you've had no fits for 2 years, then you may, depending on the mechanisms, go back to flying. So there are little discussions on that.
Okay. I know you mentioned, working with heavy machinery and that sort of thing. Then people mention working at height.
Yeah, that's the other one.
Right.
So you don't get an epilepsy sufferer going to clean your windows on the 20th floor. Right. Things can happen.
Yeah.
And so the problem with these occupations is there's danger to the individual. Yeah. Something can happen. And the impact of, say, switching on a machine and you having a fit and nobody's watching, lots of things can go wrong. So common sense.
Right.
Prevails.
I suppose the same thing applies to drivers as well.
Yeah. And driving is the other big issue.
Yeah.
The common sense law, in the UK, if you have epilepsy, you don't drive. But they have a very good system of transport, so you don't really need to drive there, especially if you're living in London. But in this country, we now have a very good, I think, common sense factor that if you're having seizures, you have to be free for a total of 3 months before you can drive again. Completely clear with the normal EEGs and with no seizures. Then, it's legal. There, the implications are not just to the individual, but to people. You could have an accident and the repercussions are not simple.
Right. The other subject that I was going to get to, you touched on it a bit, is, the clinical course for epilepsy and the triggers. So you might find somebody, well controlled, let's say, on medication. What triggers, seizures?
The common triggers are basically, so if you take the adult population with generalized seizures, right, the common trigger, sleep. Sleep is the most, the one that stands out right on top. Sleep deprived or sleep deprivation, changes in sleep when you travel through time zones, etc. That's a serious one, right? Then there are others, toxins. Obviously, alcohol is a big thing. So, you've got to get rid of all of that from your lifestyle. So every disease tells you to change your lifestyle, and you have to adapt and accommodate. And then the other triggers, fevers, flus. Very important, especially now that we're in this flu season. Antihistamines are a complete no-no for epilepsy sufferers. So always tell your family doctor when you go and have your flu treated, no antihistamines, because they trigger you just like that. So those are some of the common triggers. Hypoglycemia, where your sugar levels drop, can also be a trigger. But not very high on the list. I mean, most people generally eat well.
Yeah.
Dehydration and fluid. So if you're playing soccer or you're going to work in the sun or something, keep your fluid balance right. The minute you slightly dehydrate, most of us, we just get a dry mouth. Epilepsy sufferers can fit.
Okay. Angeline,
Yes.
I know you say you've had 7 years now seizure-free, and you're working quite well. People know that you have epilepsy.
Yes.
Your message to people that might be living with epilepsy and, maybe having anxiety around, disclosing their status, if we can say that, and how they work?
I'd say it's very much important to disclose so that people around you will be able to know how to help you. And it's very much important for people to learn about epilepsy and also the first aid, that what is it that you must do with a person who's having a seizure. Unlike other people, they still have that mentality that you need to put a spoon in the person's mouth if they are feeding and stuff, of which it's totally wrong.
Okay.
You just need to let them feed and just you shouldn't just hold them tight. You must just let them go free.
Very, very, very important. Very wise words there from Angeline Tsapete, somebody living with epilepsy. And that's where we're going to have to leave it for now. And yeah, time for another quick commercial break. When we come back, we'll carry on with our discussion on epilepsy.
Brilliant score. Imran Tahir produced a superb performance with the ball. The Proteas leg spinner put his side in the driving seat, scalping 3 wickets for just 18 runs.
Gifton Gope is flying toward third, and he is there with a triple, his first in the big leagues.
It is a Ferrari front row lockout, unless Hamilton can get on pole, and he can't. Ferrari, for the first time since France in 2008, have locked out the front row.
For all your sports news, keep it locked to Sports Live every Saturday and Sunday from 20:30.
Countries in the East African region have started experimenting with wines.
Located in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo in South Kivu province, this park is the only place in the world to find the eastern lowland gorillas.
But the most famous monument in Casablanca is of course the Mosque Hassan II. The mosque is the 3rd largest in the Muslim world.
The city of Tel Aviv and Israel's tourism ministry have teamed up with the local hotel chain to temporarily transform the tower into a 2-story suite with hot tub, room service, and very unobstructed ocean views.
Catch Trends Travel every Sunday from 12 to 1 for all the global travel and leisure trends.
Welcome back, and thank you so much for staying with us. We're talking about epilepsy, and with me in the studio is Prof. Girish Modi, specialist neurologist and head of neurology at Wits University. And we're joined now by Sulize Campbell-Smith, a mother of a child with epilepsy, and she's living with epilepsy herself. Welcome to Health Talk, Sulize.
Thank you so much.
Before we start talking to you, let's take 2 calls, one after the other. Let's start with Togozile from Johannesburg. Welcome to Health Talk, Togo.
Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you, Togo?
I'm fine. I have a question. I have a child who is 8 years old.
Yeah.
She had episodes where they look like epilepsy. So I took her to the clinic. They told me they are a result of high fever. But now they've been happening more likely often now. So I want to know, can they actually develop to turning to be epilepsy, because they are more like epilepsy. So I want to know the difference between high fever and epilepsy.
Brilliant question. Thank you very much. We'll address it just now. Let's go on to Cape Town and welcome Mrs. Jenkins. Mrs. Jenkins, hello.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for taking my call. I live in a very small town in the Western Cape. I've had epilepsy since 1979 when I was living in Gauteng, which is much more upbeat, if I can say so. I live in a very small town, but there are many people with epilepsy here, but they're very scared and afraid to come to the fore. I've been with South Africa before. I need to know if it's possible to have a support group in a small town.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Mrs. Jenkins. We'll try and address that question. There's fortunately people from Epilepsy South Africa and Epilepsy Awareness South Africa. But Prof, let's start with that.
Paraxial convulsions.
Yes.
Yeah. So paraxial convulsions occur in children up to the age of 5. They somehow stop happening after the age of 5. But I mean, you know, when we say 5, it doesn't mean like 5 and stop. It could be 5 and, you know, a little bit of gray area. But they occur predominantly in these children who have some reason for a fever. And tonsillitis, ear infections, bronchitis or whatever, these often, the minute the temperature rises above 39, there's a risk. If it hits 40, 41, you get a risk. Now, the issue about paraxial convulsions is this here, that not all children who have a pyrexia get a convulsion. So there must be some degree of susceptibility. And so that's something we always have to bear in mind. But if you look at the data on paraxial convulsions, if the paraxial convulsions are that generalized type, they do not go on to epilepsy. But if they have that complex partial type, they have a greater likelihood of going on to epilepsy. So
does the frequency determine what happens?
No,
because she says
you
that
can have repeated paraxial convulsions. And so what the pediatricians in particular do, and all the pediatric neurologists would say, that because they repeated, put the child on treatment for a short period until the whole disorder disappears.
Okay, great. All right, Suliz, tell us, I know you have a very interesting story to share with us, but tell us about your story, your journey with epilepsy.
Okay, I've started, the 1st of April 2008 was my very, very first very bad epileptic attack. I was sitting reading through a recipe to make pancakes, of all things, and I just all of a sudden had a fit. And my best friend was standing next to me. Now, he's a joker. And he turns around and screams to my mom, she's having a fit, she's having a fit. And my mom thought, well, maybe a hissy fit. Come on, really. And as my mom said, she ran in, and I was screaming as if I was a demon. And they got me off the table, they phoned the paramedics, and the paramedic just turned around and said to my mom, oh, her brain just had to reboot. That same night, I was sleeping next to my mom, and I had a fit. I actually hit almost a tooth out because of me convulsing so badly. Then my brother had to pick me up from the bed to put me on the floor to get me just away from the wood and everything that can hurt. And I went to Joburg Gen, and they did all types of scans. That was the only scan that actually picked up that there's something wrong with my brain, was the CT scan. Then they put me on medication, and it just got worse and worse and worse. And then I started calming down. Then I felt pregnant with my little girl. And I still remember I was on the phone with one of my customers, and all of a sudden I started convulsing, but they said I pushed myself away from the table and I covered my stomach. And I woke up in the hospital, and they couldn't find my baby's heartbeat. Then 2 hours afterwards, I had another attack. They rushed me to a theatre to have an emergency cesarean. I almost lost my little girl that day. Thank God she's still with us. Then, when she was 4 years old, also the 1st of April, she had a fit at school while she was sleeping. They phoned us and said 20 minutes afterwards she's still not responding. She's awake, but she's not looking at anybody, not responding. We rushed her to the hospital, and they put an EEG on her. They found immediately that it is definitely epilepsy. Since then, she had 4 attacks while sleeping at school and 2 while at home with us at nights.
Very interesting story, Prof. Just a couple of things there. Firstly, perhaps we can start with the issue of the child. Any genetic predisposition.
There's a small percentage of epilepsy sufferers where there's a proper gene defect. It's probably around 2%. And genetic studies all over the world have shown, and I have identified proper gene defects. And the genes are mostly in what we call the channels that open and close and make a cell work. Right. So
but
that's a small percentage. Then there's what we call familial. And familial epilepsy is where it happens in 1 or 2 members in the family, but it's not quite genetic, so it doesn't get transmitted. And so we're not quite sure what that is. So we have the genetic, the familial, but the majority, like I said, we don't identify causes.
All right. And in her case, I mean, she says she's been through different types of tests and this. Is it possible to have different types in the same person?
Yeah.
Or
No.
is it a question of, idiopathic?
No. It's like this here. Remember I said there's a generalized form, and then there's the partial form, and then you get that complex partial. So the complex partial has very many different manifestations.
Right.
And so patients with epilepsy sometimes think they're having different seizures. But when you break it down, it's one type. It's just different manifestations.
Right.
I mean, we often get asked by epilepsy sufferers, my epilepsy has changed. My manifestations have changed. It's still the same thing.
Okay. Let's take Zanele from Johannesburg. Zanele, welcome. Zanele, are you there? Zanele is gone. All right. Let's come back to you again then, Celise. How has this, issue that, you're living with epilepsy, how has that impacted, your life?
I'm not allowed to drive at all. So I always have to depend on my family members or friends to take me from one point to the next. So it is hard, and you know what? I try to make my life as if it's my own. Like, I don't like asking somebody, listen, I need to get to point A from here. I need you to help me. Will you please help me? If they can't help me, I will get my stuff and I'll get up and walk. Epilepsy will not get me down. Same with my daughter. I think I started having epilepsy to actually help my daughter deal with it. And you know what? That 4-year-old little girl, if I have a fit, she's the one that brings me out of it. My husband will be there, but she's the one that calms down and says to me, Mommy, wake up, I'm here. And I see my son, my 11-year-old son. His one friend actually had a very bad episode at school. He got knocked by a cricket ball, and he had a seizure because of the knock to the head. And my son was the only one that known in the school what to do. So for me to live this life, I try to let everybody else know it's not something that I want, but it's something that I'm willing to help with. Because I can go through it, so I can help you to understand epilepsy.
And how's your 4-year-old daughter coping with epilepsy?
You know what? She's a trooper, because she's in a school where there is a little girl also that's got epilepsy, but she's the one, she zones out completely for almost an hour. And my daughter is the one, especially when they're playing, that keeps on looking, and she's 2 years younger than my daughter. And she will always look for this little girl to go and stand with her because she's so scared she's going to have an attack, which happens almost every single day. And my daughter is, if she has it while she's sleeping, so she does not know about it. But the next morning she will tell me, listen, Mommy, my body is very, very sore. Did I have a fit? And I will say, yes, my girl, you did. But I'm okay, no, Mommy. And I'm like, you're perfect. You're 100%.
Very inspiring.
So she is a very smart little, almost 6-year-old. So.
Well, can I wish you well for you and your daughter? All of
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much for your time. All right. Folks, time for another quick commercial break. We're going to come back and continue our story now, looking at management or treatment of epilepsy. Please stay with us.
Need a natural multivitamin and mineral immune booster that lifts your energy and balances your pH levels? Sure you do. Lerumo, with 15 times the potassium in bananas, 17 times the calcium in milk, 10 times the vitamin A in carrot, 25 times the iron in spinach, 9 times the protein in yogurt, and 97 times the vitamin B in kale. Lerumo, the superhero. On the inside. Available at Dis-Chem, leading pharmacies and health stores countrywide. Lerumo, feel the difference.
Have we taken enough responsibility for our responsibilities with regards to freedom?
Largely the moment of 1994, that moment of absolute magic. Firstly, the voting, and of course when we watched Nelson Mandela take that oath of office, was a moment that we thought, well, we've now reached freedom. This is it. This is all that it can be.
Off with the big story of the day, where Eugenie Bouchard beat Maria Sharapova for the first time. Bouchard upped the ante and closed off the 3-hour epic grudge match with a rousing performance to win the most highly anticipated match so far in this year's clay season. Final score 7-5, 2-6, 6-4. Title chasers Cape Town City FC travel to Pretoria, intent on grabbing 3 points from a resurgent SuperSport United.
Get all the dominating stories locally and globally on Newsroom every Monday to Friday from 9 a.m.
The Law Society has slammed notices sent to 4 universities to jack up standards or risk losing their LLB courses. The Council on Higher Education issued a stern warning to the universities to conform within 6 months.
I think it will affect the university. I think outside the law faculty, there's a funding issue.
It's been 112 years since Enoch Sontonga died as a relatively unknown composer, choir master and teacher. But today his legacy lives on through his greatest composition, Nkosi Sikeleli Afrika.
For all your news updates, stay tuned to Your World from Monday to Sunday.
Welcome back. So what would you do if you saw someone collapse in front of you and have epileptic seizures? Take a look at this.
The first thing that you want to do is make sure that there's no hazards that may injure yourself or the patient. If there are any hazards, try and remove them. If you can't remove them, try and move the patient away from the hazards. Okay. And then you want to make sure that they are able to protect themselves, or you can protect their heads, because when people have epileptic seizures, they lose complete control of their body, and one of the main things that get hurt is their head. Okay, so try and protect their head from hitting the ground. Okay. After that, you want to place them in the recovery position. This keeps the airway open and makes sure that they can maintain their own airway. Basically, the recovery position is turning them in a lateral position, and that way if anything comes into their mouth or they start vomiting, it can leave the mouth by the force of gravity. After that, you want to call for an ambulance, call for help. Anybody that's medically trained can help further and prevent further seizures from occurring. You don't want to put anything in the person's mouth at all. Usually if you put a spoon in the person's mouth or something hard in the person's mouth, their jaws clench quite hard, so you can cause their teeth to break. So you want to avoid putting anything in the mouth. Rather just let them have the seizure and without intervening too much.
All right, so we're going to learn more about treatment. With me in the studio, Prof. Keresh Moody, specialist neurologist and head of neurology at Wits University. And we're joined by Mr. Kandas Kandawira, who is a social worker from Epilepsy South Africa. Welcome to Health Talk, Mr. Kandawira.
Good morning, Doctor.
All right, before we start our discussion, let's take Zanella. I believe we have Zanella back on the line from Johannesburg. Zanella? Zanella, welcome.
I'm fine, Amin. So I want to ask the doctor told me that it's epilepsy, so I don't understand. Epilepsy and epilepsy.
Sorry, the doctor told you have? Sorry, the line is not too clear.
Semi-epilepsy. Yes, it's semi-epilepsy.
Semi-epilepsy?
Yes.
We're not
yes,
quite...
I was doing grade 10 student, but I would fall down to my bed at night. I started to have shakes inside my body.
All right. Thanks for your questions, Zanella. Unfortunately, the line isn't too great. I think it sounds like she was told she has pseudo-epilepsy.
Possibly pseudo.
Yeah, can you just
so pseudo-epilepsy is a term we stopped using. We now call it non-epileptic seizures.
Right.
So these are patients who do not have epilepsy.
Yeah.
But they can, well, that's not quite correct. So there are two groups there. There are those that have epilepsy, proven everything, but in their course, in their lifespan, they often have seizures that are not really seizures. So we call them non-epileptic attacks.
Right.
So they look exactly like the real McCoy. They can fool even a trained specialist. Right? And then you get the group where they have other comorbid illnesses, particularly the anxiety, the depression, some traumatic event in their lives, something. And they can come and they can lie down here and you might actually have to give them Ativan to stop it. But it's not truly a seizure, and you can differentiate these two, using certain of our diagnostic procedures.
Okay. whilst we're still with you, let's talk principles of treatment for epilepsy.
Okay, so managing means firstly make a diagnosis. Your diagnosis has to eventually be hard copy. So you have to show evidence that this is epilepsy, because we're in the world of technology. If you don't produce the evidence, nobody listens.
Nobody listens.
It's right, they don't listen. And the interesting thing is epilepsy has always been a clinical diagnosis. So you take a good history, you listen, you get corroborative histories, and you know the patient has it. But nobody will take medicine until you show them that hard copy. And so the hard copy is effectively the EEG. There are three different types. You do a random standard EEG, which has a low pickup rate of about 60%. But if it's positive, your diagnosis is made. If it's not, then you use activation procedures. So we even use the sleep deprivation technique, and it has to be done properly because you could trigger a seizure. And so we try to identify the discharges in the brain, or we do the Holter monitoring, which is for 24 hours or more, and we try and see the discharges. To make sure you're not dealing with non-epileptic seizures or trying to identify the type of seizures, we even do video EEG monitoring. That's really limited to very highly specialized centers. Okay, having done that diagnosis, it is imperative that every epilepsy sufferer has a brain scan, whether it's an MRI or an EEG, because of, in South Africa, you might have a cysticercosis, you might have a tapeworm that's causing it. And I just give you medicines for 20 years and not knowing. You can't do that. So those are the two key essentials to diagnose.
Is that happening though?
Meaning, is every patient getting? I think every patient who ends up with a specialist, especially a specialist neurologist, will have that.
And in both the public and the private sector?
Public and private sector.
Okay.
So I can vouch for the public sector where we do this routinely, and in the private sector also it's done routinely.
Okay, and then treatment?
Treatment, once you've identified the type of epilepsy, whether it's a generalized form or the partial form, then you start adjusting medicines. You also have to take your medicines and adapt it to the individual. Okay, so the common ones the sort of first line, valproate, carbamazepine, so the Epilim and the Tegretol. There are newer ones, Lamictin or lamotrigine. There's topamyrate and Topamax, and then Keppra or Leveris. So we've got a whole range. We've got a whole range.
Lifelong treatment, or is there a point where they can stop treatment?
Okay, so that's an interesting question. The generalized forms, the complex partial, probably lifelong. It's a difficult one. The simple partial, it varies, depends on what happens. They disappear by themselves sometimes. Right. The generalized forms, there is a pseudo, I shouldn't use that word, but cure rate. So if someone's on treatment, has had no seizures for 2 years, has normal EEGs and a normal brain MRI, there's a 60% chance that this patient will go into a complete remission, which in a sense is a cure. So you should do this. So if I had epilepsy, I most certainly would take my medicines properly, avoid all the triggers, and live a slightly modified lifestyle, so I could eventually go off medicines.
Mr. Kanawira, support, I suppose, is an important aspect in treatment of epilepsy. Tell us a bit about, what Epilepsy South Africa does, and in terms of support of those people living with epilepsy.
Thank you, Doc, for the question. I would say it is very critical for people with epilepsy to have support groups. Let me say it starts from within. It starts from the family where the person comes from. So from Epilepsy South Africa, what we do, we go out to the clinics, to the hospitals, where we come across with people with epilepsy. Because if you are seated in an office, obviously you won't see a person with epilepsy. Because doctor has alluded to the complications around that. When a person comes through the studio, you would never say that this person has got epilepsy. It's not written on his or her face. So it is important for us to go out to the community, to educate the community around what epilepsy is and what epilepsy is not.
We had Mrs. Jenkins on the line from Cape Town, who was saying she comes from a small town around Cape Town, and that she's not aware of there being any support group there. What would you advise?
What I would advise is to contact our national office in Cape Town. I know that there is also another branch in the Eastern Cape where there are support groups happening there.
Okay, all right. And we'll put up, by the way, we'll put up all the contact numbers on the screen just after the show. But yeah, carry on with what you do at Epilepsy South Africa.
Yeah, what is also important, our AG was here earlier on, she talked about, employment. Usually the trend is that people with epilepsy are being discriminated against by other employers just because of the condition, without understanding what is the ability of this person, over and above the condition. So as Epilepsy South Africa, we advocate that people with epilepsy should be employed in the open labor market. No, they should not be discriminated against just because they happen to have epilepsy. We also encourage particularly the youth, to be engaged in learnerships, to upskill themselves so that they create opportunities for them to go into the open labor market like any other citizen in the country.
Right, very, very good. Okay. Before I say my goodbyes, let's just take two tweets to go through them very quickly before we say our final goodbyes. Okay. Now, the first one is somebody that says, I am not broken, I am not strange, I am not embarrassed, I am living with epilepsy, and I'm a person with a disability. I am proud. That's Joyce Sender. And somebody says, we may be a day late, but we may want to thank all the amazing fathers, we may want to thank all the amazing fathers living with epilepsy or fathers supporting a child with epilepsy. That's great, great indeed. Well, folks, that's all, unfortunately, we had time for. And to my two guests, Candace Kandawira and Prof. Gerish Moody, thank you so much for your time. Okay, folks, well, yeah, that's all we had for you. And thank you so much for staying with us. We'll see you again next week, same time, same place on SABC. Please do take care.
Shooting campaign. We're telling genuine stories from real people that have been affected by the SABC.
It's also interesting to get the backstory in terms of their dreams to be on screen and eventually getting the pleasure to do that.
And understanding that they're communicating on a platform that speaks to millions of people. It speaks to how the SABC can fulfill its mandate.
The SABC represents the opportunity for so many young South Africans, for old South Africans, to be able to look at the world that they may not experience any other way.
People should continue to pay their TV license because it allows the SABC to bring quality programming.
The TV license is really part of the lifeblood of the channel and the corporation.
When you're listening to your favorite jams, you're listening to your favorite radio DJ, you must know that you made it possible by paying your TV license.
It's such a holistic process that goes into TV licenses. It's not only one part where we say South Africans have to pay for TV licenses. You pay a TV license because you get so much value out of it, and that's the content that you get every single day on the SABC platforms.
I have been in the film industry now for 51 years. I am quite satisfied with the evolution of television now, that you have got a lot of actors and you have got a lot of crew members, which will also play part of paying our licenses, because I think it's proper.